She found it behind the ventilator. Not during the admission. Not during the handover. During the routine equipment check at the end of a long night shift. When the ward was quiet and the monitors were steady, and her hands were moving through the motions of a task she had done 1,000 times. An envelope, yellowed at the edges, tucked into the gap between the ventilator casing and the wall, like it had been placed there deliberately, like someone had wanted it hidden, or wanted it found, and hadn't been sure which. The man in the bed was named Arthur Bowen, 71 years old, admitted 3 days ago with respiratory failure. No family listed on the admission form. Next of kin, none. He was dying. The ICU team knew it. Arthur Bowen almost certainly knew it too. He had the settled quality of a man who had been expecting this for a while, who had perhaps been preparing for it. The nurse's name was Ama Darko. She was 34 years old. She had worked the ICU for 7 years. She thought she had seen everything a night shift could produce. She had not seen this. The envelope had a name on the front, written in ink that had faded but was still legible. 2 words. A name she had not heard spoken aloud in 26 years. Her mother's name. Ama Darko had grown up in a house that was held together by her mother's hands. Not metaphorically. Her mother, Grace Darko, had been a woman of practical, physical competence. She fixed things. Pipes, appliances, the fence at the back that kept going wrong. She worked double shifts at a textile factory and came home and cooked and helped with homework and never, not once in Ama's memory, said this is too much. She simply kept going. Because there was no alternative. Because Ama's father had left when Ama was 4. And there was nobody else. Grace Darko had died when Ama was 8 years old. A Tuesday morning in November. A road she crossed every day on the way to the early shift. A driver who was going too fast. Gone in seconds. Ama had been taken in by her aunt, her mother's older sister, a woman named Abina who was kind but overwhelmed, who had 3 children of her own and a husband who worked nights, who had done her best, and whose best had been enough to get Ama to adulthood, but not enough to answer the questions. The questions Ama had been carrying since she was 8 years old. The biggest question was the simplest, and the one nobody had ever satisfactorily answered. Why had her father left? Not where had he gone. Not what had become of him. Just why. Her aunt had said he was not a good man and left it at that. The handful of adults who had known her parents had offered variations of the same deflection. He wasn't suited to family life. Your mother was better off. Don't think about it. Ama had thought about it every day for 26 years. She had become a nurse partly because of her mother. The practical competence, the keeping going. The belief, which Grace Darko had passed to her daughter without ever stating it directly, that the most important thing a person could do was show up for someone else in their worst moment. Be in the room. That was what her mother had always said. Not with words. With the way she lived. Ama had tried to live that way too. 7 years in the ICU. The hardest ward. The one where being in the room was everything. She was good at it. She was also, after 7 years, very good at not bringing her own things into the room. At leaving the weight of her history at the door. Until the envelope. Arthur Bowen had arrived by ambulance on a Thursday evening. Found collapsed in his flat by a neighbor who had not seen him in 2 days. The flat was tidy. Deliberately tidy. The paramedics' report noted it. The kind of tidy that takes effort. The kind of tidy a person makes when they are not expecting to come back. He had been conscious on admission. Barely. But enough to speak. He had given his name. He had said no family. He had said, I know what this is. And then he had let the team work without resistance. With the quiet compliance of someone who had made peace with what was happening. Ama had taken over his care on the second night. She had read his chart. 71, retired, former teacher, secondary school English for 30 years. Chronic respiratory condition. History of depression, managed. No significant relationships listed. No emergency contacts. Nobody. She had seen this before. People who arrived at the end alone. It never got easier. She did not think it should. On her first night with him, he had been awake for a brief period. She had been adjusting his medication line. She had spoken to him the way she spoke to all her patients. Simply, directly, without false brightness. "My name is Ama. I'll be with you through the night." He had looked at her. His eyes were gray and sharp, and carrying something she couldn't name. Not fear. Something older than fear. "Ama," he said, his voice rough from the ventilation. "That's a beautiful name." "Thank you," she said. "It was my mother's choice." He had closed his eyes. She had thought he was going back to sleep. Then he said, very quietly, "What was her name, your mother?" Ama had paused. The question was unusual. Patients asked many things in the night, but not usually that. "Grace," she said. "Her name was Grace." He was very still. She watched his face. Something moved across it. Something she filed away without examining. Then he slept. She found it on the third night. 2 a.m. The ward in its deepest quiet. She was doing the equipment check. Moving methodically around the bed. Checking connections, checking readings. The ventilator last. When she moved the machine slightly to check the rear connection, she saw it. The corner of an envelope. Cream-colored, yellowed with age. Wedged into the narrow gap between the machine and the wall. She pulled it out carefully. It was sealed. The flap tucked in rather than glued. The kind of seal that could be opened and resealed. The kind that suggested the person who had placed it there had opened it many times. And then put it back. And then retrieved it again. And finally decided. She turned it over. The name on the front was written in a careful, slightly old-fashioned hand. 2 words. In ink that had faded to the color of old rust. For Grace. Ama stood very still. For Grace. It could be anyone. Grace was not an uncommon name. The envelope could have been here for years. Left by a previous patient. Or a visitor. Or anyone. She looked at the man in the bed. Arthur Bowen. Who had asked her, on the first night, what her mother's name was. Who had gone still when she said Grace. Who had the settled quality of a man who had been preparing for something. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. Her hands were not completely steady. She noticed that. She took a breath. Then she sat down in the chair beside his bed. And she waited for morning. She did not open it. She wanted to. The wanting was physical. A pull in her chest that she had not felt since she was 8 years old, and searching through her mother's things for an explanation that wasn't there. But it was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Grace. And Grace was gone. And opening someone else's letter, even a dead woman's letter, felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she had the right to cross. She sat with it until 6 a.m. Through the rest of her shift. Doing her rounds. Checking her patients. The envelope in her uniform pocket. Present against her side. Like a small stone. At 6:15, Arthur Bowen woke. His breathing was labored. She adjusted his oxygen. She checked his readings. She did everything she was supposed to do. Then she pulled her chair to his bedside. She took the envelope from her pocket. She held it up so he could see it. His eyes found it immediately. She saw it. The recognition. The relief and the terror of it arriving at the same time. "I found this behind the ventilator," she said, her voice steady, Even, it says for Grace. He did not speak. My mother's name was Grace, she said. Grace Darko. She died when I was 8 in November, a road accident. His eyes closed. She watched his face. The expression of a man receiving something he has been dreading and longing for simultaneously. Did you know my mother? She said. A long silence. The monitors beeping softly. The ward beginning to stir around them. Yes, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I knew Grace. Ama looked at him. How? She said. He turned his head toward her. His gray eyes. The thing she hadn't been able to name. She could name it now. Guilt. Old, deep, carried for 30 years. May I tell you something? He said. Before you read it, may I tell you myself? She put the envelope on the bed between them. Tell me, she said. He spoke slowly. Each sentence placed with care. The effort of breathing made every word cost something. She did not rush him. She sat with her hands folded. And she listened. 30 years ago, Arthur Bowen had been a secondary school English teacher at a school in East London. He had been 31 years old. He had been, by his own account, a better teacher than he was a person. He had known Grace Darko. She had worked at the textile factory 3 streets from the school. He had met her at a neighbor's gathering. She was 27. She had a 4-year-old daughter named Ama. She was separated from the child's father. She was the most quietly remarkable person he had ever met. They had been together for almost a year. He paused here, his breathing harder. She adjusted his oxygen without being asked. He looked at her hands doing it, at the competence of the gesture. You have her hands, he said. Ama did not respond. She waited. He had been offered a position, a teaching post, in Edinburgh, a department head role, the kind of opportunity that came once. He had been 29 years old when the offer came. Ambitious. The kind of ambitious that does not yet understand what it is willing to cost. He had taken the post. He had told Grace he was going. He had told her he would write, that they would find a way. Long distance for a while. And then she could come. And then they would figure it out. He had not written. Not because he stopped caring. He said that carefully, looking at her, as if needing her to hear the distinction. Not because I stopped caring, he said, but because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I stayed connected, I would come back. And I had made a decision, and I was too proud and too frightened to unmake it. He pressed his hands together. I told myself she would be fine, that she was strong, that she didn't need me. I told myself those things for so long that I began to believe them. He looked at the window. And then I heard about the accident, about what happened to Grace. He was quiet for a moment. A mutual friend wrote to me, months after it happened, because nobody knew we had been, nobody thought to tell me directly. I didn't go back, he said. He said it flat. No defense in it. Just the fact. I didn't go back, and I have lived with that every day since. She did not speak for a long time. The ward had fully woken around them. The day shift arriving. The sounds of handover beginning at the other end. She was technically off duty. She did not move. She sat with what he had told her. Not with anger. She had expected anger. She had braced for it. The way you brace for something you know is coming. What she felt instead was more complicated and more painful than anger would have been. Grief. The specific grief of a shape becoming visible. The shape of what her mother's life had contained. What she had been carrying. Alongside the factory shifts, and the fence, and the cooking and the homework. Alongside all of it. A loss she had never mentioned to her daughter. A person she had loved who had simply not come back. She thought about her mother. The way Grace Darko had been, in Ama's memory. Always moving, always managing. Never sitting still long enough for her daughter to ask the questions a child asks when they sense something underneath. Had she been lonely? Ama had never thought to ask that as a child. Children do not ask their mothers if they are lonely. They assume their mothers are simply there. Complete. Like furniture. Like weather. She had been 27 years old. When Arthur left, 27 with a 4-year-old and a factory job, and a man who had gone to Edinburgh and not written. And she had kept going. Because there was no alternative. Because Ama needed her to. Ama looked at Arthur Bowen. At the 71-year-old man in the ICU bed. With the letter he had written and hidden, and not sent for 3 decades. She did not feel what she might have expected. She did not feel hatred. She felt something quieter, and in some ways harder. She felt sorry for him, not in the way that erased what he had done, in the way that recognized it. A man who had made one decision at 31, and carried the weight of it for 40 years, and had come to the end of his life still carrying it, still trying to say the thing he should have said, to a woman who was no longer there to hear it. "May I read it now?" she said. He reached out, his trembling hand. He pushed the envelope slightly closer to her. "Please," he said. She opened it carefully. The paper was thin, folded in thirds, the kind of paper that had been handled many times. The creases soft, the edges worn. She read it. She did not read it aloud. She read it to herself, in the chair beside his bed, while the ward moved around them and the monitors beeped and the morning light came through the window. The letter said, "Grace, I have written this 31 times. This is the 32nd. I know because I have kept every version in the same box and counted them when I couldn't sleep, which has been most nights for most of the years since November. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness. I am not entitled to that, and I know it. I am writing because I have to put this somewhere, because carrying it without putting it somewhere has become more than I can do. I left because I was afraid. Not afraid of you, never of you, afraid of myself, afraid that I would choose the smaller life and grow to resent it, afraid that I would stay and become someone who made you unhappy by degrees. I told myself I was protecting you from a worse version of me. I understand now that this was a story I told myself so that I could do what I had already decided to do, and that the kindest name for it is cowardice. When I heard about the accident, I did not come back. I have no reason for that which deserves to be called a reason. I was paralyzed. I was ashamed. I thought, and this is the most terrible part, I thought that coming back would be for me and not for Ama. And so I stayed away and told myself I was being selfless, and that was also a lie. Ama was 4 when I last saw her. She had your eyes. She had the quality you had of looking at things directly, of not flinching. I have thought about that child every week for 30 years. I have wondered if she is well. I have hoped that she found people who deserved her. I am sorry, Grace, not because I expect it to reach you, not because I believe it changes anything, but because it is true, and I have been dishonest enough for one life. You deserved better. She deserved better. I knew that, I just didn't know how to be it. Arthur. Ama folded the letter along its worn creases. She put it back in the envelope. She held it in both hands. In her lap. She did not cry. She had cried for her mother many times. At 8, at 14, at 20 when she qualified and wanted to show someone. At 31 when she had her first really terrible night in the ICU and had sat in the car park and spoken to the dark. She had cried for Grace Darko many times. She did not cry now. This felt different from grief. This felt like something completing. A picture gaining its edges. She looked at Arthur Bowen. At his gray eyes watching her. At the effort it was costing him to stay awake. At the expression of a man waiting for a verdict he has already accepted will go against him. She took a breath. She kept going, Ama said. He looked at her. After you left, after everything. She kept going. She fixed things. She cooked. She worked double shifts. She helped me with homework and she came to every school thing and she was never, not once that I remember, not there. She paused. I don't know if she was lonely. I was 8. I didn't know how to ask that. But I know she was brave, every day, in the ordinary way that most brave people are brave, just continuing, just showing up. Arthur closed his eyes. She watched his face. I know that, he said. I always knew that about her. I want you to know it too, Ama said. I'm not telling you because I want you to feel worse. I'm telling you because she deserves to be known. And you're one of the people who knew her. And she's gone. And I'd rather you carry the full version of her than a guilty one. He was quiet for a long time. You are very much like her, he said. I hope so, Ama said. She stood up. She was 4 hours past the end of her shift. She put the envelope in her pocket. I'm going to keep this, she said, if that's all right. He nodded. One small movement. More than agreement. Something like relief. The specific relief of something given to the right person. Ama, he said. She turned. She would have been proud of you, I'm certain of that. Ama looked at the dying man in the ICU bed. Who had known her mother? Who had loved her mother? Who had failed her mother in the specific, human, ordinary way that people fail each other when fear is louder than love. She thought about what her mother would have said. She thought she knew. Get some rest, she said. Simply. The way she said it to all her patients. But this time with something underneath it. Something she didn't have a word for. Something between forgiveness and acknowledgement. Between not excusing and not condemning. Between understanding and letting go. Arthur Bowen died 4 days later. Early morning. The ward in its night quiet. Ama was not on shift. She was told by her colleague who had been with him. He had not been alone. Ama had arranged that. Without being asked. Without being on duty. She had spoken to the ward coordinator. She had asked that someone sit with him through the nights. Someone always in the room. Her colleague said he had been peaceful. That at the end, his breathing had slowed and then stopped. That he had not seemed afraid. Ama sat with that for a while. In her car in the hospital car park. The same car park where she had spoken to the dark at 31. She thought about endings. About how most of them were nothing like the stories. No grand resolution. No moment of completion. Just a shift, a slowing, a stop. And then the living carrying what remains. She took the letter home. She put it in the box she kept on the top shelf of her wardrobe. The box that held the things from her mother. A photograph. A recipe written in Grace's handwriting. A small carved wooden bird her mother had kept on the kitchen windowsill. She put the envelope beside the photograph. For Grace. Next to the face of the woman, it was addressed too. She closed the box. She put it back on the shelf. She drove to her Aunt Abina's house on a Sunday afternoon. 3 weeks after Arthur died. She had been going once a month since she was a young adult. The obligation had long since become something else. Habit, affection, the specific comfort of the only person left who had known her mother. Abina was 71 now. Sharp as ever. With the quality that very old women sometimes have of having no remaining patience for anything not worth their time. Ama told her everything. All of it. Arthur Bowen, the letter, what he had said. The year he and Grace had been together. Abina listened without interrupting. Which was unusual. Abina generally interrupted. When Ama finished, she was quiet for a long time. I knew about him, Abina said. Ama stared at her. You knew, she said. Not his name, Abina said. Not where he had gone, but I knew Grace had been with someone. I knew it ended. I knew she didn't talk about it and I learned not to ask. Why didn't you tell me? Ama said. Abina looked at her. The look of someone who has been carrying their own version of a thing. What would I have told you? I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what had happened. All I knew was that my sister was sad for a long time after something ended, and then she put it away and kept going. The way Grace always kept going. Ama looked at her hands. She kept going, she said. She always kept going, Abina said. That was Grace. They sat together in the Sunday afternoon quiet. Two women who had both loved the same person. In different ways. For different lengths of time. Carrying different pieces of her. Together holding the whole. It came to her on a night shift. 3 months after Arthur died. She was doing the equipment check. Different patient, different room. The same motions. She understood something she hadn't before. Not about Arthur. Not about her mother. About herself. She had spent 26 years carrying the question of why her father had left. The unanswered question. The one that had sat beneath everything. Her choices, her work, her particular gift for being present with people who were leaving. She had been practicing, without knowing it. Every night shift. Every bedside. Every hand held in the dark. She had been practicing the thing her mother had lived. Be in the room. Don't leave. Stay. And the letter had not answered the question about her father. It had answered a different question. One she hadn't known she was asking. Whether her mother had been loved. Really loved. By someone who had seen her clearly. Who had known what she was. Even if he hadn't known what to do with it. The answer was yes. Grace Darko had been loved. Imperfectly, and from too far away, and not for long enough. But completely. By a man who had written 32 letters, and kept every one. Ama did not change after the letter. Not in any dramatic way. She was still the same nurse. Same ward. Same shifts. Same quality of attention that her patients sometimes described, in their better moments, as the feeling of being fully seen. But something had settled. Something she had been carrying for 26 years. Not dropped. Not gone. Just set down gently. In the right place. Where it could stay without being carried. She kept the letter. She read it sometimes. Not often. When she needed to. When the ward was very hard, and the night very long, and the weight of being in the room for everyone else felt like more than she could hold. She read it and thought about her mother. About the 27-year-old woman with a 4-year-old and a factory job, and a man who had gone north and not written. Who had kept going anyway. Who had fixed the fence and cooked and showed up and not once, made her daughter feel the weight of what she was carrying. That was Grace Darko. That was who she had been. The box on the top shelf of Ama's wardrobe now held 5 things. The photograph. The recipe in her mother's handwriting. The carved wooden bird from the kitchen windowsill. The letter. And one new thing. A photograph Ama had found in Arthur Bowen's personal effects. His social worker had called her. She was listed as the person who had spent the most time with him in his final days. They had found a photograph and no one to give it to. In the photograph, a young woman was laughing. Standing in a garden. The sun behind her. A garden Ama did not recognize. But the face she recognized immediately. Her mother. 20-something. Before Ama. Before the factory. Before the fence. Before the accident. Just laughing. In a garden somewhere. In the sun. Ama put it in the box. Next to the letter. Next to the recipe. Next to the wooden bird. She closed the lid. She thought about the envelope tucked behind the ventilator. About what it had taken for Arthur Bowen to put it there. To carry it to that hospital. To make sure it was found. By someone. By the right someone. She thought it must have taken everything he had left. And she thought, she would always think this, that it was the bravest thing he ever did. The one act, in the end, that measured up to the woman he had left behind. She went back to the ward. She put on her lanyard. She picked up the chart for the patient in Bay 3. She knocked on the door. She went in. Be in the room. That was what her mother had taught her. Without ever saying it. Just by living it. Ama Darko was in the room. She had always been in the room. She always would be.